welcome to this final episode on data breaches and the legal aspects. And to have this conversation, I've had the privilege of having Thanuki with me. She's been sharing insights on various aspects relating to the data breach. Today, our conversation is going to be more on what is in store for us in the future, because every country is coming up with their own set of laws. So while we talk about one world, the question I have is, will these laws and regulation create a divide amongst all countries and amongst all people? So when it comes to cyber crime or data breach, also have the same challenges. The crime is committed from unknown location. Eventually, you need to trace the perpetrators. It requires multiple law enforcements, a lot of countries to come together to address this issue. And I don't think we are yet there even to share basic information or intelligence. So with this background and our Data Protection Act to come into enforce maybe in a couple of months, how do you see the future evolving for us?
Okay.
Tanuki?
Okay. So my response, I think I will look at it more generally, on a global level. I would think it would make more sense,
Absolutely.
because the Sri Lankan data protection law is very similar to the GDPR in many ways. So I think something I would like to do is I like to predict the future of these things, and how you can do that is by analyzing current trends. You look at what are the emerging legislation, what are the global cyber threats, what are the different ways they have been addressed in different countries in terms of interesting cases, and then we can say that there are a few things that are coming to mind in terms of trends for the future. So one of those things is, I think, shorter notification timeframes is something that different countries are going to start looking at. Um, so I feel like at the moment you have like a 72-hour notification time frame. Over time, they will try to push this for 48-hour regulator notifications, with like a 24-hour mandated for critical breaches when it comes to financial systems and health data and things like that. Um, and this time rule may tighten over time. And I think that's very important, because the impact of a data breach is, as we've been talking about over the course of the last few episodes, is something that, if you take the impact of a data breach, it's not something that we can gauge per se. It's, right now it can be a certain amount of data that is being dabbled with, but in the next hour or so, this can just expand at a level that you cannot, put your finger on. So that is why I think, like, notification timeline has to be tightened further, and we see that happening. I think that that is what they're going for, um, given the nature of cyber attacks and how quickly they are able to spread, especially with now with the involvement of artificial intelligence. The time factor on in the hands of the bad actors is always going to be a massive advantage to them, as opposed to us, who are essentially going to be the victims of certain data breaches. I think there was a recent incident with Ticketmasters in 2024. They had a hack affecting 560 million records, and it shows how delays can exacerbate a damage. That's not a small scale; it's a huge
Yeah,
scale. Okay,
absolutely.
so that, and then this would mean that organizations will need to have real-time monitoring and automated reporting tools, and individuals will get faster warnings to act. These are things that will become trendy in a few, maybe months even. We don't really know. We can't really say. And also mandatory regulatory reporting across jurisdictions. So this is important. I feel like across jurisdictions. Now, if you take the United States, you have federal jurisdiction, it's different state to state. Being able to report across different states is very important. You need to be able to do that very quickly, because lack of regulator reporting hinders enforcement. And the GDPR model proves that centralized data aids systemic fixes. And Sri Lanka's PDPA is also trying to go for that GDPR level adequacy and pushing DPA oversight. So we can see that also happening in time to come. And I also think like another thing that we can look forward to is having lower thresholds for individual notifications. So that is where GDPR, PDPA might require individual notifications for most breaches unless harm is negligible. Let's say something that is fully encrypted or fully
Minimized.
anonymized. Sorry,
Yes. No
anonymized.
worries. No worries.
Yes. So, I mean, because we know that anonymized data doesn't count as personally identifiable information, it's not considered sensitive. So, apart from things like that, to make it uh, a requirement
More
for
practical. Yes.
yeah, for individuals to notify as soon as they see a breach, and
Absolutely.
that drops the significant harm test quite low. So it makes it possible for us to get our hands on a matter than waiting for it to be escalated, and then time is of the essence when it comes to these things, and that is very important. And also, I think public disclosure mandates over time will become stricter, especially when it comes to large incidents where a greater group of individuals are affected. This may differ from country to country, obviously, but still, tightening of public disclosure requirements, following up on our conversation on breach notifications from the previous episode. So, like, for example, Dell, I think they had a hack in 2024. Um, there too, it was, I think, about 49 million. Yeah, 49 million customers were impacted by this hack. So it eroded trust when undisclosed. So it's important to make sure that um, these breach notification, public disclosure requirements are tightened, and we can see that happening in the years to come. And I think more and more incidents can also raise awareness on this issue and push for tighter regulation in that area. And lastly, my area of practice, which is AI specific breach rules, which, I mean, even though it's not so much visible in Sri Lanka at the moment, um, I'm expecting this to blow up sooner or later, and it'll be important that even if there isn't a specific AI related law in this country, it's important to be proactive and set up some policies within organizations to deal with them uh, before any law comes into place. It's very important because I think even the GDPR, now they're looking at harmonizing the GDPR with the EU AI Act, and within that there'll be changes to the notification aspects when it comes to AI driven breaches. And we also see that even in the US, it is expected that AI breach related rules are going to come into some of these privacy regulations in the US. So there's nothing stopping Sri Lanka also having the same, because we have provisions to release guidelines from time to time under the PDPS. The Data Protection Authority is able to do that. They are empowered to do that when they come into play. So at that point, I think that's something also to look forward to, AI specific breach rules. And I think that's really coming for us very, very soon. Um, and I also think one last thing I would add is like a global harmonization of all these different laws with different regional nuances by, in the next couple of years, 2028, 2030 or so, we can expect that to have a global harmonization of these, where businesses will be able to streamline global policies while adapting strict local penalties. We have that localization as well, but having a global understanding of this is very important, especially when it comes to protecting data, because data is no longer something that is there in some data center in your country. And I'm pretty sure we understand that our data is everywhere. And sometimes you and I may not even know where some of our data is stored and who
Mhm.
actually has access to that data.
Yeah.
Because of that, the harmonization of these rules is important. And I do see that, I do predict that as a trend if we look forward, that this is going to be something that we can expect.
Absolutely. And you started off saying, predict the future. So I'm going to take a 12 months from today and I'm going to get you back again next year, same time, and probably relook at all what you just said. And I would assume or believe that some of these things you are saying would happen at a rapid pace than otherwise,
Yeah,
especially when you're talking about harmonization. And I think countries like Japan have already started discussing about regional data protection
manipulation.
regulations, right? So while you may have your localized laws, but how would you do cross-border harmonization so that there is a free flow of information in a regulated manner so that it still gives you the optimal protections for that? And the other interesting thing which you highlighted is the timeline, right? From 72 hours to bring it down to 24 hours. Now, typically there are two things which happens. Now, when there is a breach, it's usually you hear the news from somebody else, right? This is like I always relate this to a death in the village, right? And the dead man is not going to come back and say, "Hey, I'm dead. Go tell everybody," right? It's somebody else, right? So somebody would say, "So and so has passed away," and then the message goes on, and it spreads fast. Yeah, it's a bad news. It's a sad news, and the so is true with a data breach as well. It's usually, and most of the time, it is a third party who actually brings it to light and says so and so's data is out there or so and so has been breached. So the challenge is for the organizations to detect it before somebody else notifies them.
Yes.
So which means the organizations will have to internally start looking at their process and see how they can actually improve and detect even the slightest indication of a breach, right? So that means a lot of work, not only for the senior management or the boards, but also for the technical people. But that also brings in the end users as well, because today we are having an AI conversation everywhere, and I think people are using AI left, right, and center. Right? Organizations are still grappling to understand how people are using it.
Yeah.
Right? So the next wave is that somebody is going to do those prompts. They're going to uncover data which has been fed by users, and that would fall under accidental breach, where the users have taken the data, fed it into the AI to probably enhance their job, but eventually that's going to have a reputational risk of the organization. Thanuki, you were trying to say something. Go ahead.
Just when you said that, I thought I should add there was an instance of, I think, not just Samsung but some other organization. I just clarified. They just typed the word poem and got Chat GPT, I think, to just say poem over and over again. And as it was repeating the word, it started releasing confidential information fed in accidentally by employees in the organization. I'm not sure whether it was Samsung, but we need to check that. But that's like a proper example of
Yeah,
what happened with it. So, this is also a data breach
absolutely.
in every way,
Absolutely.
AI
Correct.
driven, but also in a sense as accidental exposure. But it's also become a breach now, and the lines are getting blurred so much with emerging technologies. So these are all things very interesting
Yeah,
examples, things to think about.
absolutely. So my take, Tanuki, is we need to take a data-centric approach,
Yeah.
right? So at the end of the day, it's a data, right? You identify it as intellectual property, or you would identify it as a PII data or a financial data.
Yeah.
Based on that, you need to build your own controls. Based on that, you need to define your access controls. Like who would have access to that information for what period? How would you collect? How would you use? How would you store? How would you remove? So all this is data centric.
Yes.
Technology is there to build additional controls. primary
Yes.
control, secondary control, maybe tertiary controls. And you also need to use controls or technology to detect intrusions.
Yeah.
And that you got to detect as fast as possible.
Yes.
When you have a 72-hour window, your detection should be way too closer to zero for detection, right?
Yes.
I'd rather say detection is good, but prevention is
Is
the way to go.
yeah, for sure.
Closing thoughts, Tanuki?
Um, do not think of it as an afterthought. You need to consider protecting data as a like okay, we'll say it should be your number one priority in any organization because organizations today thrive on data. And it is important to be proactive, not reactive. And more than anything, it is very important to take accountability when things go wrong, and know that it is not always a bad thing to end up having a failure. It will help reveal certain things about your systems which you can improve on. But at the same time, it's always important to remember that your customers and their data is valuable, it's important, and you need to treat it with give it the respect in terms of sanctity that it deserves to have. And keeping that in mind, um, your actions should align, and as it does, it'll fall in place even in the legal terms, but it should never be considered a legal burden or just another checkbox that you need to be ticking at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Well said. It cannot be a checkbox and it should not become a legal burden.
Yeah,
Right. With that thought, Tanuki, thanks so much for spending time to talk about various aspects of data breach.
no
Personally,
problem.
for me, it was refreshing. I'm enlightened, and I'm sure, audience, you would have a lot to gain out of this. So, if you found anything very interesting in our conversation, please comment. Or if you have any specific questions or you would want us to talk about anything specific, please do send us a message. You can send us a message either to me or to Tanuki on LinkedIn inbox or in any other form. If you can reach us, we'll be more than happy to address those specific topics for you. Thank you so much and have a great day.